Hey Steelers Syndicate, welcome back. I'm Joe Rockey, your host, and today we're going to break down what our former quarterback, Big Ben, the Hall of Famer, the former face of the team, said about the Steelers, and he was flat out wrong about it. He said that the Steelers are being too cheap in free agency. Now, I want to break down a couple of important things here. A, what they are being cheap in, what they are difference between the NFL free agency and the NHL's free agency, for example, and what makes them not like the Pirates in some ways, but like the Pirates in other ways. So the starting point is that the NHL has a static salary cap and the NFL has a dynamic salary cap. Now, I'm going to use 100 million as the examples for both to just make my math easy here. So in the NHL, you can go up to 100 million, or they have a floor that is 70%, which means that every single team in this calendar year for the NHL season has to be between 70 and 100 million, prorated, no exception. When we look at everyone's contract, you have to be in that window. For the NFL, it's a dynamic 5-year rolling system. Now, I'm going to get into a bunch of accounting terms here, but I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. You still are given that same 100 million, and you have to spend between 70 of it and 100 of it. But at the end of the 5-year span, you have to have spent all of that 70 for the given year. So, say in this year, I only want to spend 85. That is 15 above the 70. Cool, there's no problems. But there's also this $15 million gap or 15% gap that we haven't spent. So that means next year we have that 15 million to spend. So in the following season, I now have a floor of 85, 70 plus 15, and a hard cap of 115. You see, that 15 million they didn't spend rolls over. And say the following year that they choose to only spend 80. Well, they didn't get to that floor, so there's a 5 million spread. That 5 million spread then is the first 5 million that gets spent the following year. But they went to 80 out of 115. That means this 25 chunk gets moved into year 3. So now their floor is 70 plus 25, 95 million, and their top cap is 125. This is why when we look at websites like Over the Cap and how much the team's spending, we see that each team has a different amount of maximum that they can spend each year. And it's a tremendous benefit if you realize you're trying to save up to make a run. Because if we can save 25 million and have, or extra 25%, it's not millions, it's percent, an extra 25% going into a season compared to another team, if every GM is equal, which obviously they're not, but for the sake of discussion, if every GM is equal, your team will be default 25% better. The same is true with dead money. Just use that as a subtraction. So if you're wasting 15% of your cap on a dead asset, for instance, if you would cut someone with guaranteed money, that's how a dead asset can come around. Or if you trade away someone who had a lot of guaranteed signing bonus already paid to them, that becomes dead money to you on your books. Well, that means we have less money in free agency and salary cap in general to spend upon another team. So the creation of dead cap money is a thing that can weigh you down and destroy you. And it can happen a lot of different ways. Obviously, cutting a player is a way to get dead money. Trading a player away, as I just mentioned, or that player retiring is also a mentioning of it. So what the Steelers had for years under Ben was a lot of guaranteed money in him that they kept putting down the road to make his salary cap number smaller this year. But because they were doing it in the way of saying, we'll guarantee you a big check right now, but your base salary down the road is going to be very little, it meant that there was lots of guaranteed money out the door even though the cap hit would be smaller down in that moment in time. It's a way of playing with accounting. But the bottom line is, if you retire before that contract is all the way complete, the dead money is a cost to that team, and they can't do anything about it. So if right now Patrick Mahomes just said, guys, I'm out, that was cool, eat that 7 years I got left of dead money, Kansas City basically doesn't have a way to build a team anymore. They'd have to go start cutting half of their lineup. But all of that money, because it's spread across 7 years, is why Kansas City can field a capable and competent team. So how does this apply to Ben saying everyone's being cheap right now? How does the Steelers actually winning with this? 2 reasons. The first is they're not giving a whole lot of guaranteed money. They're also not giving very long contracts. I believe the longest one they've given was 3 years so far. So even if they make a mistake on a 2-year contract, it doesn't stay on your books very long. Secondly, by saving money to move into next year, they will make themselves more competitive in the future. So this is why when we look at the whole structure of the offseason, it's virtually impossible to trade Deontay Johnson right now because he's only 1 year into that money that he just got. The guaranteed money decreases by each year of the contract by that same percentage amount. So it's a 4-year contract, 1/4 is 25% of the cap hit that goes away. So when we look at Deontay specifically, he is tradable next year, but not this year in terms of the substantialness of his cap penalty. So all of this to say, the Steelers within the realm of salary cap are being completely fine. There is nothing that they're doing that is going to hurt the team. They're not pulling a Pittsburgh Pirates and being cheap and never spending this money. Because part of the rules of the NFL is you have to. Over a 5-year span, you need to cut those checks out. And there was a couple of years ago, it was either the Bengals or the Browns, like one of the bad Ohio teams. They weren't there. They weren't even close to it. And in week 15, they gave like half their team raises because it was the only way they were going to get there. So the NFL intensely makes sure that this rule gets fired. It's the only thing the Players Association actually wins in their negotiations, and it is how it goes about. So the Steelers are doing nothing wrong with their free agency signings. Where they did get cheap like the Pittsburgh Pirates, though, is their staff. Because there is no NFL rules upon the staff. There aren't. And I've said this before, I'll say it again, go back to any of my videos. I think it's come up in every single one of them. Matt Canada is not a capable offense coordinator, and the whole reason he's here is because he's cheaper than having a severance package to Matt Canada and paying for a real offensive coordinator. End of discussion. If you want to say the Pirates were cheap, they were cheap by keeping Matt Canada. That's it. They are not being cheap in these free agency signings. They are setting themselves up for the future. And also, let us remember the most important way the Pittsburgh Steelers build their team is always been through the draft. We are not a free agency team. Part of this is the legacy of Ben and the rest of that Super Bowl team. They became too expensive to buy new free agencies in. It had to be done through the draft. But once you're doing something the right way, there's no reason to change it. Like, what free agency out there were you going to add to this team that we didn't already do? We brought in the best left guard out there, and we brought in arguably the best cornerback that's out there. The 2 biggest needs of this team just got swiped away. Now, granted, they need another corner. There's no doubt about that, and they need to cover the middle of the field. But there's certainly ways to do that, as I outlined in our last episode. The draft is coming around the corner, and we're going to be updating with what that means. But to give a little sneak peek, and just because I don't want to miss the transaction that happened since my last recording, signing the swing guard, or swing tackle rather, from Tennessee that we just did, to me, we're not drafting offense on day one. It's not happening. And we're going to get in tomorrow's episode to talk about the packages of 5 that they can put on the field for any given play, and why actually drafting an offensive weapon will be to their detriment.